seminar for credit. You're supposed to submit your final paper, which most of you will be a reflection for the seminar that you attended. And it's due next Tuesday, I believe, by 5 p.m. on the office. It will have the sign-in sheet around.
Yeah, so this is the sign-in sheet, and we are in the process of sort of updating the attendance and the questions on this. So just don't worry about the question score, but make sure you double check the attendance that we've got everything that you attended, either whether you watched it, whether you were here in person, whether you watched it online, or you watched an archive one. If there's an error on the prior weeks, let us know, and make sure you sign in. And then we'll transpose this to kind of have two grading systems going, D2L and this thing. So we'll transpose it to that. So.
Okay, great. And finally, last but about this, for our last seminar, we're very pleased to have Amanda Howard with us. Amanda is project manager for the Urbanism Next Center at University of Oregon. She's also got alum from our Masters of Urban and Regional Planning program, and she will be talking about the impact or exploring the participation and land use impact of e-commerce. With that,
great, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm excited to be back here. I'm a Merck alum from 2017. Something I would have never told you while I was a student was that I would be really into freight, but it has happened. Turns out freight is amazing and super interesting, and so I put together kind of a long presentation, and I'm going to try and pack a lot in because it's a really fascinating topic, especially as we think about the impacts that e-commerce are having and what's changing about the world, and also bringing in automation. Yes, I'm Amanda Howell. I am a project manager for Urbanism Next at the University of Oregon. We are a research center that's exploring the impacts of autonomous vehicles, e-commerce, and then new mobility more broadly on cities and what that means for land use and real estate, transportation, and urban design. But really, at the end of the day, what does it mean for equity and health, health and safety, the economy, and the environment? So that's really why we care. As I said, I'm trying to cover a lot, so I want to kind of quickly talk about how goods have moved traditionally, because provide a little context, and then what we're seeing with the push for automated trucking and some developments, some major milestones that have happened in the past few years in the automated trucking side of things, then getting to the growth of e-commerce and the related rise in last mile delivery, and then attempts to automate the last mile, and then diving into the land use and transportation impacts, some early strategies that we're seeing that cities are trying to adopt to manage some of these impacts. And then I'm going to touch a little bit on a research effort that's underway, and then what I think some of the research efforts, future research efforts that are needed. So how goods have moved traditionally, you're starting at the point of production, and then ultimately you need to reach the point of the consumer. So you need to go from the first mile to the last mile. And there are multiple touches along the way, and each of those touches ultimately is money. So you want to minimize the touches in order to get the product to consumer kind of as quickly and as efficiently and as cheaply as possible. So from moving at the start, so from production to port, we have containers full of goods that are loaded onto ships. And I want to note the volume. So pre-1970, a container ship might have had about 800 containers that it could accommodate. Now today, a major container ship can accommodate over 20,000. So the volume is staggering, and total shipments grew by 290% between 2000 and 2013 worldwide. So the point is that we're moving a lot of goods around. So they go from the port to the warehouse, and with that, they're arriving at the port of entry, they're loaded onto a train or truck, and then they're going to this warehouse or distribution center. And then from there, they're getting trucked to either another maybe fulfillment center, or they're going to retail locations where consumers can actually purchase the goods. So that's sort of how things have been traditionally. But what is starting to change? We are seeing this push for automated trucking, and what's driving that push towards automated trucking? Well, the volume of goods for starters. So we have a ton of stuff coming in, and there's lots to move around, and the industry needs to move it around as efficiently and as quickly as possible. there's obviously an interest in wanting to eliminate waste and having trucks that are not moving around empty, because that's lost income. And so if you can have an autonomous truck that you can say, this shipment needs to be picked up, you can improve efficiency of routing. And that's something that they really want to do. There's also major shortages in the trucking industry, major labor shortages. So the American Trucking Association said turnover rate at large fleets averaged 89% in 2018. So there's a massive labor issue there as well. And not to mention, there's also the issue of, drivers need to stop and rest and they need to sleep. And presumably an automated truck is not going to need to do that. So you can keep it on the road for longer. So I want to kind of talk through some of the major developments over the past few years and major milestones, and kind of emphasize the time, money, and resources that are going into the development of automated trucks in this past few years. So in October of 2016, Otto, which is Uber's self-driving truck company, made an autonomous delivery of beer, naturally in Colorado. It went 120 miles. There was a safety driver in the cab who shifted to the back until the truck exited the highway. But what does that mean really in terms of autonomy? Well, so they were in the back, but it was flanked on at all sides. There were 4 Colorado State Patrol cars moving along with it, as well as 3 auto cars. So, what does that mean really? July 2017, self-driving startup Embark partners with Peterbilt. And then in November 2017, they start moving refrigerators between El Paso and Palm Springs in self-driving trucks. But again, what does that mean? They're going 650 miles. What's happening is a driver is taking the container, and the trailer is actually getting hooked up at a rest stop right off the highway. And then it's traveling autonomously on the highway, and then it's getting taken off the highway at another rest stop, and then being driven by a safety driver to a final location. So again, I mean, it's happening in these small chunks, really. It's not really fully autonomous. There's also a ton of volatility in this industry. So just, less than 2 years later, Uber decides, they're done with the automated autonomous truck program. They're just going to focus on self-driving cars instead. Moving to this year, 2019 alone, Daimler announced that it plans to invest more than 500 million euros in autonomous trucks. And I think I want to make the point that it's really important to pay attention to the players, look at who's investing, and also when they're investing. Because next, in February, you have Amazon announcing that they're investing in the self-driving car company Aurora. Interesting. In May of 2019, the autonomous trucking company TuSimple is awarded a contract to pilot mail delivery for 2 weeks for USPS, because everybody's trying to compete and stay up. In June of 2019, Starsky Robotics tests. This is from what I found, the first fully autonomous truck on a public highway in Florida. It went 9.4 miles on the Florida Turnpike, and there was a remote operator in Jacksonville handling the first and last mile operations of that truck. Interesting. Again, also in June, we've got, this one is a really funny looking one. So Volvo announces that its self-driving truck Vera will begin transporting goods between a logistics center and a port terminal in Gothenburg, Sweden. Fiat Chrysler announces a partnership with Aurora. Remember Aurora? Amazon's investing in Aurora to use its Ram truck line for deliveries. So to get autonomous technology in those trucks. And then in August, UPS announced that it was investing in TuSimple. So this is a really interesting, definitely evolving field. And, I think especially these big carriers are really trying hard to think about how they can compete. And I think Amazon's driving quite a lot of that. From a logistics perspective, the hope is that you can have platoons of trucks to maximize efficiency with a driver in the truck at the front of the platoon. And then you'd have several trucks moving behind it without drivers. So the vehicles would be communicating wirelessly. So vehicle to vehicle communication. And that's the hope. There's a lot of testing of this being done in Germany and Netherlands and other parts of Europe. There's issues currently with the platooning. And one of the biggest troubles they're having is with this coupling and decoupling. The tech hasn't figured this part out. Because what happens if I'm a driver on the highway and I want to move between trucks 3 and 4? Do they all stop and wait? what does that look like? And so the technology is not there yet, and so it is going to be contingent on development of the technology and also on legislation that enables it. There's a lot of speculation about like what the timeline of all of this is really going to look like, if it's even going to come to pass. I think this is an interesting one from McKinsey, that they have these different sort of phases of, platooning, constrained autonomy, where you have the driver doing pickup and drop off, and then potentially we're looking at full autonomy, like they're driving without any safety drivers in them, and they can move on city streets and they can do all the picking up and dropping off, and not just the highway portion, possibly sometime after 2027. But it remains to be seen. It's a very kind of ever-changing industry that we're trying to keep our tabs on. Okay, so what else is changing? E-commerce, of course, is huge, and as a result, the growth of last mile delivery. The rise of e-commerce in the United States, even cats can order online now. So this chart shows the e-commerce sales as a percentage of total retail sales in the US between 2000 and 2018. So in Q1 of 2000, it was less than 1%. By Q4 of 2018, it's over 11%. So online sales are up, and they're continuing to go up. E-commerce growth worldwide, if we look at that, sales in billions of dollars from 2014 projected to 2023. Here's where we're at in 2019. So the retail sales worldwide projected to amount to $3.5 trillion. So it's massive. And what does that mean for shipping? Staggering growth in parcel volumes. So Pitney Bowes estimated that parcel volume grew by 17% in 1 year between 2016 and 2017. And they estimate that every second, 2,300 parcels are shipped globally. Some countries are currently, seeing more deliveries than others. So China is really high up there. And then we have Germany and we have the US. But it's also not just that things are being delivered to us, because we're not just keeping everything that we get sent. So it's not a one-way street. Returns play a huge role also in this like growth of shipping and movement of goods around. We're returning a ton of the stuff that we're ordering, and that's because, I think in part companies are making it cheap, if not free, and easy. So Zappos offers free shipping and free returns for 365 days. I mean, it's pretty easy to return it in a year. And then this is a graphic on the stats of the share of the population that they reported that they returned a package purchase that they'd made online at some point over the last year. It's over a year's time, but the return logistics are huge. And there's also now specialty providers who are moving into this space to handle returns as separate supply chains. It's really seen as a necessity in order to compete with Amazon as well as brick and mortar. But it's also impacting warehousing, because warehouses traditionally were not built to flow product in and out. They were built to flow product out to a destination, to feed the beginnings of supply chains. Like, that's how they were built. And so that's also really impacting what we're seeing with warehousing and these other third-party vendors who are now moving into this return space. And then, of course, a huge driver of all of this is the fact that we've seen this really huge growth in fast and free shipping options, especially in the last few years, or at least it's free to the consumer, or so we think. That's a real driving force. Amazon added basically 315 square miles of same-day and/or one-day coverage in 2018 alone. So that means like all of those areas in orange, they all have access to same-day and/or one-day coverage. And there's also there's these shipping wars happening. There's this constant push for fast and faster delivery. And Amazon is definitely setting industry expectations. So they announced in April of this year that they would move from free 2-day shipping to 1-day shipping for all Prime members. And then what happens? Walmart announces the same in May, and Target follows suit in June. So it's just growing and growing and growing. How are we handling this, and how are we getting all these packages and this growth of volume? It's no longer just that you would it's going to a store or it's getting delivered to your home or maybe your work. We're starting to see all these options to try and benefit both the shipper and the consumer to increase ease of delivery, while also reducing instances of missed deliveries, lost or stolen packages. So on the consumer side, here's some of the things that we're seeing. So in addition to the options you had previously, now you can choose to have your package delivered to a parcel locker. That's better for shippers. It reduces missed deliveries, it mitigates package theft, and there's also efficiencies to be had with aggregation. So the delivery person's delivering multiple packages to the same location. Direct into your car trunk. That requires partnerships. It requires partnerships with companies like OnStar, OnCall, and it's limited to certain make and models. So this is not, it's different than the parcel locker, but it does reduce missed deliveries, and it's another option. Alternatively, you could maybe also have it delivered directly into your home if you feel so inclined. So Amazon Key offers this service. Some grocery delivery grocers, this Waitrose in the UK is offering it. Also requires partnerships, and it might require smart locks and additional tech, which Amazon Key is willing to sell you. They sell you the camera so you can see it being delivered in real time. There's kind of more limited users for this, but it's another option in order to try and deal with this flow of package delivery. Businesses are also finding new ways to try and cover the last mile and final 50 feet. So the previous one, sort of examples were more on the consumer side, like how are we receiving packages? This is looking more on the business side, how and who's making the deliveries, and that's also in flux. And so this graph just keeps getting more complicated. I'll talk a little bit more about this later because I want to touch on the PSU, UPS work that's being done, but we are starting to see companies using e-cargo bikes and mopeds for deliveries. We've seen that more in outside of the US, but we're starting to see it more here now. And there are definitely positives of this. It reduces congestion, it can reduce dwell times of vehicles, and better for the environment. So traditional carriers, USPS, UPS, and FedEx, they are definitely still out there delivering a ton of packages, but Amazon is growing, and they're increasing the share of packages that they deliver all the time. But how are they ramping up so quickly? Through contracting, that has been a huge piece of how they have ramped up their delivery options so quickly. So they've expanded, they contract with service providers. So there's lots of unmarked white vans that you might see. A lot of those are delivering Amazon packages. And they're also incentivizing their own employees to try and start delivery businesses. So that's a fleet of trucks that they ordered, and then allowing Amazon employees to pay $10,000 and 3 months pay to start their own delivery business. I just want to note there's been some really interesting articles written about the labor issues of this side of the contracting business recently. I'm not really going to touch on some of the major labor issues, but they're really interesting, and what this looks like, the pressure for people to deliver and to meet quotas and time. So I would encourage you to look at that if you're interested. We also have courier network services, and they operate similarly to transportation network companies like Uber and Lyft. They utilize online apps and platforms to facilitate delivery of goods and or meals. The couriers are considered independent contractors. So for Amazon Flex, for example, people can use their own vehicles to deliver packages, and they choose, to some extent, when to work. And they go to facilities, they pick up packages, and then they're assigned routes. Relatedly, we have crowdsourced delivery, which it's similar but a little different. It leverages local non-professional couriers to deliver packages, but the thing I think that sets it apart from courier network services is that it's not company specific, and it's more like sort of digital freight brokerage. So the idea being that they're platforms where people can connect. So let's say I'm driving to Salt Lake City from LA. I'm going anyways. Why don't I just sign up and say that I can carry, I'll make a buck and carry a little freight along the way. So sort of thinking about how we're routing and trying to maximize efficiency as much as possible. And then of course, it's not limited to goods either, this sort of growth in what we're seeing delivered. Meal deliveries are also starting to become huge. We have all of these different companies operating in the meal delivery space. I was in Uber in Oakland, and that Uber driver told me that he also delivered for Uber Eats, and that one time someone just ordered a single cupcake. So, we have these options now. Like before, if I'd wanted a cupcake, I would either have to go get it or I'd have to just live with the fact that I wanted a cupcake but couldn't have one. And now we make it a lot easier to sort of fulfill those impulse desires. Meal delivery is also multimodal. This one's from Santiago, Chile, this picture on the left, but the one on the right is actually a picture that we took when we were at the APA conference. So this person is delivering for Caviar on a jump bike, which was interesting. But I also think it's important to note he was picking up food from a restaurant in the Tenderloin in San Francisco, which is a place I think, there's some potential safety issues in that neighborhood, not a lot of foot traffic in the evening. And so, there's also something to be said for like what happens if people are ordering from a place, because this place in particular was seeing a ton of orders, but not a lot of people actually coming in. So kind of what does that do for the street as well? And they're expected to continue to grow. So this is global revenue forecast in millions of dollars, projecting out to 2023. So the light blue part is the platform to consumer delivery. Those are the CNS. So, we're not anticipating that that's really going to go anywhere. Okay, so that was about the last mile and other goods meals delivery generally. But now I want to touch on what we're seeing in terms of the efforts to automate the last mile. And the logistics industry is pretty efficient in that whole first part of the equation, but there are a lot of inefficiencies and high costs in the last mile. In particular, there's a lot of inefficiencies to deliver to residences, undeliverable packages, missed deliveries, multiple attempts to deliver, stolen packages. So there's a lot of emphasis. This area is really ripe for disruption and innovation. And it's expensive. There's a lot of labor involved in the last mile. So here's what we're seeing with the push for autonomous delivery robots. The one on the left is Neuro. They've been piloting in Chandler, Arizona, and also Houston. They've partnered with Kroger and Domino's. The one in the middle, that one's actually we're starting to see quite a lot on college campuses. That's Starship Technologies. It is on campuses at George Mason University, Northern Arizona. They're using it in Pittsburgh. And I thought it was interesting. I was reading an article about this, and someone from Starship was talking about like the future of the potential of these little robots that can move around autonomously and deliver Chipotle, but also maybe deliver medicine to people who have mobility limitations. But he was talking about how the robots, there is a limitation. They can't climb the stairs, so people have to, if they're in a multi-story building, you're going to have to come down and get it. But he was saying kind of, if this really takes off, building owners may eventually decide to include a separate door for the robots, almost like a doggy door. So, is that the future? And then of course, Amazon's also in this market with their Prime Scout, which they've been piloting outside of Seattle. Then we also have sort of these larger or slightly larger autonomous delivery vehicles. These ones are kind of we're not seeing them quite as much being piloted yet, but this is kind of what some of the future could look like. The orange one is the BoxBot that's being tested in Oakland. It's the size of a walk-in freezer, and it's capable of holding 63 cubic feet worth of packages. On routes that involve more complex driving or toting a package to a doorway, BoxBot would send a human along with it. But the founders of this one think that there's a lot to be gained just from smarter routing and dispatching software that could make it more efficient, even if there is still potentially someone involved in the final 50 feet of that delivery. The Rev1, that one is the one in the upper right. That one's designed to operate in bike lanes, and they're testing that in Ann Arbor. They're starting with food deliveries in dense areas, and they're running routes that are just kind of 1/2 mile to 2.5 miles. So, we'll see what the sort of applications of that is and if it can take off. And then that last one is the cargo. Looks like a beetle or something. And that one has an internal sorting system that allows the vehicle to shuffle packages it's carrying into the correct order for delivery. But there's the pesky problem of the final 50 feet, because what if you can get it to the curb but not to the door? Well, this is Ford's answer. They've been partnering with Agility Robotics. So the idea is that the vehicle itself would be autonomous. This robot would fold itself up into the back of the car. And when it got to the place where it needed to deliver, that robot would climb out of the vehicle and carry the package up onto your doorstep. I'm not entirely convinced that this is the future. It doesn't, what happens if it encounters a dog, for instance? But, you know, we'll see. And then lastly, the other kind of space that there's definitely starting to be some development in with delivery is drones, of course. So Wing, which is under Google's parent company Alphabet, they're testing in Canberra, Australia. They were the first to receive FAA approval and start testing in Virginia. Amazon has applied for FAA approval. This one's kind of Amazon's idea of the future, like the happy customer on the other end receiving their package from a drone delivery. But interestingly, it's actually UPS that got the highest certification standard given yet by the FAA. That got a Part 135 standard, which has no limits on the scope or size of operations. So that's currently the highest level of certification you can get, and UPS has that. So I want to explore now all the impacts of all these changes. And I want to look at both the land use and transportation implications. So on the land use side, demand for warehousing is changing. It's kind of a difficult graph to read, but basically this report is showing that tight market conditions led to 272 multi square feet being delivered between Q1 2018 and Q1 2019. And leasing demand for quality and new space together with tenant competition boosted the average rental rate of 63 cents per square foot year over year. So the demand for warehousing and industrial land is definitely up. We're seeing that really across the US. And then the Amazon delivery facilities have exploded across the US. This is what some call kind of the other Amazon effect. So there's the delivery side, but then there's all this warehousing that's going on. And part of where this is coming from and why we're seeing this really sharp increase after 2013 has to do with the Supreme Court ruling. That was the Wayfair versus South Dakota US Supreme Court ruling on sales tax. So Amazon essentially lost the court ruling and said it was required to pay in-state sales taxes. And so what that meant was that then Amazon decided that it was going to move warehouses into all across the US, as opposed to having those sort of facilities that they had maybe scattered throughout, and also get product, get things as close to the consumer as possible so they can have as short a delivery window as possible. So that's why we see this sort of huge increase in their presence. The siting and size of warehousing is also changing. So it was 76,000 square feet average size in 2003. It's over 184,000 square feet by 2017 for the sort of average size of warehousing facilities. And so we're building out. So that's what a kind of massive square footage warehousing facility looks like. That one's in the Midlands in the United Kingdom. But we're also building up, depending on the locale, in that effort to try and get things as close as possible to the end consumer. This one is a facility that's actually brand new. It just opened. This is right outside downtown Seattle. And the fact that it's 2-story, but it also has that truck ramp and they can load from 2 stories, that is new and huge. That's something that we're going to start to see more of especially in more urban areas. The retail footprint is also changing. So store counts peak in 2017, but then we're starting to see decreasing the number of store counts overall in the last 2 years. Square footage has also been decreasing. I mean, I will note the scale of this is not huge, but I think it illustrates that there's a trend that we're seeing this decrease in the size of retail. And what that is, on the land use side and real estate side, what we're starting to see as well is, of course, some brick and mortar closures, especially of big box retail and malls. This most recent, this is a brand new headline at the bottom about whether or not Lloyd Center, which is here in Portland, and it's actually an urban mall, will it be around by next Christmas, given the change in demand. On the flip side, so we're seeing definitely some brick and mortar closures, especially of that big box retail end, but we're also seeing this growth in what is considered and called experiential retail. So this is the growth and change in square foot leased between 2007 and 2018. And you can see experiential retail there at the end is absolutely far and away has the most demand. And what is experiential retail? It's basically, the idea is that experiential retail is like sort of gives you that immersive experience. There's less product in store, there's smaller footprints. There was a lot of focus on events. So it's a really different type of shopping experience. And the Apple store is kind of sort of considered to be the original experiential retail, like kind of where that's actually all coming from. So it's a really different shopping experience than sort of the big box vibe on the left versus this, oh, you can, get your cucumber water and try some things out and have this whole immersive experience. And so that's what consumers are interested in on the retail side. And then, of course, transportation impacts. So, of course, we're starting to see congestion increase. We're moving more goods around, so it's definitely contributing to congested roadways. Obviously, that's not the only factor. There's a lot of things driving increasing congestion, but the increased truck volumes are definitely contributing to it. This was just from the New York Times. So the main entryway for packages into New York City leading to the George Washington Bridge from New Jersey has become the most congested interchange in the country. Trucks heading toward the bridge travel at 23 miles per hour, down from 30 miles per hour just 5 years ago. And so that, of course, creates timing issues. That's lost revenue if things are stuck in traffic. There's a lot of issues with that. But of course, it's not just congestion on the trucks or on the highways. There's a lot of urban congestion as well. And some of the reasons for this as well is like when we're thinking about the courier network services, there might be a passenger loading zone or there's a truck loading zone, but there's really kind of no home at the curb for some of these new services that we have, like the courier network services. So like this person doing a delivery for Grubhub tried to come up with, here's how I'll claim space. I'll just put this nice little note in my window and let you know that I'll be right back. So it should be fine. And what that all means is that it's contributing to, we're seeing a lot of increasing competition for the curb, instances of double parking and impeding the flow of traffic. Of course, also there's blocked bike lanes, and that's a lot of safety issues around this increased volume of deliveries. There's also increasing vehicle miles traveled associated with all of this. So the average length of haul has decreased by 296 miles since 2000. So the trips are shorter, but they're more frequent. So truck VMT in urban areas grew by 17.7% between 2011 and 2016, even while it fell in rural areas. And so what that means is that e-commerce has increased the number of short haul and last mile trips. How are cities starting to try and manage all of this? One thing that cities are trying to do is incentivize off-peak deliveries. So New York City has an off-peak delivery program where they encourage carriers and receivers to plan for deliveries between 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. So that's sort of a more traditional thing that's been in place for a few years. But some of the more innovative things that we're starting to see cities and other research institutions try and pilot are, for instance, on the right there, the University of Washington Urban Freight Lab did a study. They put a common carrier locker system in the bottom of the Seattle Municipal Tower. And with that being the idea that if it's a common carrier locker system, it's not just FedEx delivering to just a FedEx parcel locker or UPS delivering to a UPS locker. It's common carriers. And so how can you aggregate and increase efficiency and reduce dwell time, and also have delivery people spend as little time in the building, not going from office to office. And so they piloted that. It was generally successful. And so I think it'll be interesting to see where that goes. One of the newest things that we're starting to see is curb reservation systems. So there's a company called CurbFlow, because there's an opportunity to monetize all of this. But Washington, D.C. piloted curb reservations using CurbFlow. And so what they did was they removed curb parking at 9 locations, and they turned them into pickup drop-off zones that could be reserved for up to 30 minutes. They piloted it for 3 months, and they just ended the pilot, and so they're doing their data analysis right now. But what they found is really interesting. So they double parking decreased by 64%. Commercial drivers made more than 15,000 space reservations during that pilot. And interestingly, on-demand deliveries were the most frequent users of these pickup drop-off zones. So I think it'll be interesting to see where that goes if DC decides to make that a permanent project. But the next city that's going to be piloting this is actually in Columbus. And then, hooray, e-cargo bike delivery. So obviously, PSU and UPS have just partnered. So we're doing cargo bike delivery here in Portland, brand new. But New York City also just announced that they're going to allow Amazon, DHL, and UPS to park cargo bikes in their commercial loading zones and without having to pay for the spots. I did think it was interesting when I was reading about this one. I think, so they're allowing up to 100 bikes as part of the program. 90 are operated by Amazon. There we go. But I want to end with cities. We need a lot more information about this. It is a wild west. There's still a lot that, I mean, there's so much that we don't know about what this is doing to streets, where we like, is there, where are the most congested areas? Where do pickup and drop-off zones that maybe need to be added and curb parking removed? It's so new that there's not a lot of information out there. But I do want to highlight a study that is happening, or just happened here in Portland, that is, they're just doing a data analysis right now. This research effort was led by Professor Kelly Clifton with Gabby here in the room, to assess the frequency and types of freight being delivered and by what modes. So data was collected at 12 market rate multifamily sites from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. for one day this fall. And so the data analysis is still underway, but the initial results indicate that 75% of deliveries happen off-peak. So outside of the traditional commute peaks, which means that traditional trip generation methods aren't capturing they're not capturing 75% of these trips if we were just only sticking with traditional trip gen methods. So the next steps are, well, data's coming soon for that. And so I think I encourage you to keep an eye out for that. But we really need to learn a lot more. We need to understand specific parking locations, dwell times. I don't know how long that person's going to be there, but it seems like a long time. We also, I think, really need to understand trip substitutes versus trip complements. So if you get your cat food delivered now and you're substituting that trip, there are potentially definitely a lot of efficiencies involved with that, because UPS, FedEx, those carriers, they may be able to route a lot more efficiently than maybe all of us going to the store to get things. But there's still so much more we need to understand in order to really know what that impact is. And on top of that, if you're getting that delivered and that's a trip you don't need to make, what trips are you potentially making instead? So what's the relationship between freight trip generation and also person trips on the whole? So there's just a lot more that we need to learn. So with that, I'll end, and I will also make a plug and note that we have our Urbanism Next conference where we talk about all kinds of things, but definitely e-commerce and freight will be a topic of conversation, and that will be coming up in May. So thank you so much.
So Amanda, that's interesting and compiled with so much information. It's great. What about on the package side? Have you seen anything on the packaging side in terms of innovations? Just
Oh,
are we
like
just going to stay with a cardboard box that's two times as big as the thing that needs to be shipped in it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's like definitely there's a lot of interesting and important questions being raised around the sustainability side of it and just the amount of packaging that we're generating. I haven't seen anything. I haven't specifically looked for anything super innovative on that side, but I also haven't seen anything. Yeah, hopefully that's in the works.
Okay.
This is kind of related. As you were going through your presentation, it's kind of astounding just like the juxtaposition between efficiencies and total inefficiency. Like someone being like, I'm going to have one cupcake delivered to me in a van. And it just seems, especially with like the rising returns, it all seems so consumptive and so like environmentally destructive. And is there anything that can put an upper bound on that? Like I'm trying hard to recycle this little thing, but the world is just like blowing up with e-commerce as it makes it so much easy for us to just buy all this crap.
Yeah, the culture of convenience is strong. What I didn't include that I thought was interesting was in Paris. There was just this last week. The mayor of Paris wrote an op-ed in Le Monde about how they are going. She wants to put caps on the number of deliveries and specifically crack down on Amazon is part of what they were thinking about, what she really wants to do. And so I don't know that this is going to come to pass, but the idea being that there would be only so many deliveries allowed in certain neighborhoods, and they would have assigned windows of when deliveries could happen, and after you reached a certain point, it would just, that would be it, you couldn't have any more. And that they would also levy fees, and those fees would be levied on Amazon in order to try and kind of stem the tide. I think, there's what I've already read about that is that those fees would be pretty much automatically passed on to the consumer. So, would that impact demand if those fees are being, if we're starting to actually feel the cost of the convenience more? I don't know that that's going to go anywhere, but I think that there is starting to be. They're definitely starting. I'm starting to see a lot more in the news, especially trying to kind of elevate the conversation and the fact that we should be thinking about the cost of convenience. So the sustainability is a huge piece, but then also sort of these labor issues. In fact, and labor issues on the warehousing side, labor issues on the delivery side, and this sort of push to deliver and have really, really long shifts. So I think we're at a point where we're starting to see more efforts in getting people to be more aware of it, but I'm not exactly sure where that's going to go. Yeah. Yes.
Question from online. On that note, do you think that major companies like Amazon will have any responsibility for congestion mitigation, and what are federal or local governments holding them accountable to, if anything?
So I don't think I think part of the problem right now is that there's not enough data and cities don't have enough understanding at this point in order to really think about how they're holding them accountable. But I think congestion pricing on the whole is going to end up being something that we're going to, that's a way that cities will try to start to manage this. So congestion pricing on the whole, but then also maybe these curb kiss fees as well. So if you're kissing the curb to try and do a delivery, levying fees on companies for that space and starting to try and monetize the infrastructure a little bit more than we've done in the past. I think that's something that we'll start to see a little bit more of. Yeah.
I kind of have a safety question related to the autonomous last mile delivery things. And it's kind of two parts. The first question I have is, you mentioned the Rev 1 is to operate in bicycle lanes. Has there been any studies done as far as safety effects with bicyclists with that? And then my second question has to do with the drone delivery. And I'm a little bit familiar with a couple of autonomous aircraft companies out of Bingen, Washington, and kind of how they operate and the safety things that go into place as far as takeoff and landing. And I'm wondering, like, what limitations would apply in a like more residential or business environment for that?
So on the first question regarding the Rev 1 things that are operating in bike lanes, I don't think I think that those are still so new and so early in their piloting phase that there haven't been any studies to look at what the impacts of trying to be on the road and share the space with that is. I think, there are learnings that we can have from the e-cargo bike deliveries, which we're sharing that space with, and those are, on the road right now. But nothing specifically on those autonomous delivery ones that go in the bike lane. A little bit more on the sidewalk drones, because we're seeing those piloted more. And so what are their interactions with pedestrians and with other road users? And there's been some sort of interesting anecdotal information out of Pittsburgh where there was an issue with the sidewalk little robot and a person in a wheelchair, and the issue with that. And so, now the company went back and they're trying to, now tweak the technology to make sure that they're sharing the road more, using the road more. But I think that part is still so new that we haven't seen any studies yet. On the drone delivery side, so restrictions on space. I think that's going to be huge. I think that's going to be a huge issue. And actually, I'm looking at Becky, my colleague, we were together, and we were just in Detroit a couple weeks ago, and there was a company that is basically managing they're working with FAA and drone companies to give drone companies information on where they can and cannot land. But it seems so far that there's not a ton of restrictions. And I think that's going to be, I just don't think that there's going to be a lot of positive public perception to just having drone deliveries, if the only places that they can't go are maybe limited to around certain institutions or things like that, but they can just go everywhere. I think that's going to be, we're going to see some problems with that. But I don't think, as of yet, they're allowing piloting in certain areas, so we're not seeing them all over, but at least from what we heard from this company, there's not a ton of restrictions on it. So it's going to be, I think there needs to be a lot more engagement with the public around this topic before they just start doing.
I guess my main question with the safety is just, there's a company called Aravel, and they have an aircraft called Flex Rotor, and it essentially takes off vertically like a helicopter, and then once it is at a certain altitude, it drops and becomes wing-borne, and then when it wants to land, then it will come back down again, and it is terrifying to be next to it when it starts up before it takes off, and they definitely have very good security procedures around it, and there's quite a wide area where you do not want to go in, so that's why I was concerned about the space requirements.
Totally, yeah. I think that there's definitely some real safety issues as well. That's something that's, flying through the sky and having to land, and where is it landing, and so the idea, I think, with some of the drones too. There's some videos you can watch of the Wings drone doing his pilot, because it's doing the same thing, where it's lifting off and then turning and flying and coming down. Or it's hovering, and then the package is being delivered like a spider. So. But, what happens if it just drops? It just seems like, there's a lot of things to figure out with safety issues around that.
This was a really excellent presentation, and Amanda, no disrespect to you. Right now, I'm going to walk out in support of the hundreds and hundreds of PPS students who are on school strike right now to eventually deliver demands and rally in Terry Trunk Plaza for a lot of sustainability issues in Portland to the city, and a lot of them will address transportation. And so if you're willing to join me, or if you'd like to come in the next like 5 minutes. They're delivering their demands at 12:30. I hope that some people join, and that if we're going to fix the sustainability problems of transportation in cities, it's going to happen out there with those kids and not in the like technocratic ways that we've thought about transportation in the past. Thanks.
Question about autonomous vehicles. What happens when one of these trucks kills somebody? If anyone was killed, no pun intended, Amazon's test program or Uber's test program.
Well, it did essentially for Uber for a while, because that happened with an autonomous car, not an autonomous truck in Arizona.
Yeah. Because these companies, they kill somebody, there is no amount of money, there's no amount of public press, there's no amount of money, anything you can do to punish them. Because of their luxury brand, they're one of the largest truck manufacturers. They're also really deeply entrenched in politics in the United States and in Germany. There is nothing you can do to punish them or make a mistake or change their behavior. Look at Amazon. At this point, if Amazon does something terrible, there's nothing you can do. So autonomous vehicles are so far away from being reliable, trustworthy, or usable. It's insane to do this right now. We just don't have the technology, the computer processing power, nor the public awareness for this to be remotely safe by itself without pilot cars and police escorts. And so we're wasting our money by having 8 cars surround one truck to go 9 miles. Yeah, that's cool for PR, but what's the reality, honestly, here with liability?
Yeah, the liability piece is a really interesting question. And it was also interesting, liability is a really interesting question with autonomous vehicles in particular, because there are also so many different parts going into making it autonomous. So, like in the instance of the Uber crash that killed a woman in Tempe, it was questions about, well, was it a failure of the LiDAR? And so, is it the LiDAR company that's then responsible? Is it the cameras? Is it Uber? Was it the driver, the safety driver who was in the front seat? Who's liable? And so we haven't figured that out. Well, in that specific instance, we have, but liability has not been figured out at all. And I think the thing, it's interesting. I think we were thinking that automated trucking would be where we would see autonomous vehicles maybe sooner. But I actually think where we're starting to see, and we may see autonomous vehicles and automated technology sooner, is actually the low speed technology. The autonomous shuttles, they're going like 10 miles an hour, 15 miles an hour max. Because the highway driving, yes, it's sort of, you're on a straight shot, there's a lot less, things it's not nearly as complicated or as challenging as being in an urban environment, with, being on a highway. But going at the speeds of highway driving, there are issues with latency. So the fact that the technology needs to be able to take in information and know what to do quickly enough. Going at top speed, going 60 miles an hour, is not going to have the time to react if there's an issue with latency of data. So I think that's actually where we're seeing. I mean, there's definitely a lot of investment and a lot of work going into this, because people see this as an opportunity to save money. If we can mitigate some of the labor shortages and also reduce the amount of labor needed. Labor is expensive, so that's why companies are investing. But I actually think that where we'll see more autonomy first is actually that low speed shuttles on the road testing, and maybe potential use cases that we'll see. And I agree with you. I think the technology, we have a long way to go before this technology is something that I think we are going to feel comfortable.
Speaking of congestion pricing, do you think that freight providers are supportive of using roadway pricing to incentivize different types of trips at different times of day? And separately, have any cities considered bans on full truck bans on trucks over a certain size in specific areas as a way to encourage alternative delivery options?
Can you repeat the first part of that?
Sure. Do you think that freight providers are supportive of using roadway pricing to incentivize different types of trips and at different times of day?
So I think the answer is maybe, to some extent from what I've seen. I think the most applicable thing I can think where I've seen maybe some, especially in pricing incentives, has more to do with like a port entry, where there's a lot of truck backup going onto the ports in order to try and pick up those containers. They did do some work specifically in LA and Long Beach where they created an entry system where you would pay more to pick up during the day and pay less if you could shift port of entry in your pickup to do it overnight. And so kind of the incentivizing fee structure of like if you pay more for a certain time and pay less for another. But they were already paying. So I think, it's always hard to levy new charges. I think it's possible, but I think, I don't know for sure. And I know that with the New York City cargo bike delivery, there was already a little bit of pushback from some of the trucking companies in the city who are also now kind of frustrated with the fact that space is being, loading space is being given to the cargo bikes. And then now there's like less space for the trucks, and where are they going to go? So potentially maybe there is, if we have reached a breaking point where they're willing, there's a willingness to pay for sort of that congestion pricing, pay more for certain things for others. And then the second part of the question?
Do you think that any cities have considered full bans on trucks over a certain size in specific areas to kind of address that last mile delivery?
Not that I'm aware of, because I think it would be really. I also think it would be really hard because like banning trucks. There might be instances where certain trucks, like there's areas where they can't go. They have to stay on certain truck corridors and stuff. But I think banning the idea of trying to ban trucks as a whole, like there's a lot of economic implications for that, and so I don't know of any city that's trying to do that off the top of my head.
If you have time for one more question, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay, cool. So as like bike cargo deliveries increase, has there been any impact that you've seen or discussion about it changing bike facilities and like bike infrastructure? As these cargo bikes get larger, the space in a bike lane is taken up more by them. So I wondered if...
Yeah. I haven't heard that specifically yet related to the e-cargo bikes, but I think that to me that tracks more with the larger conversations that we're having with some of the other new mobility technologies, e-scooters, and just the fact that there's more demand on this space and there's more demands on the bike lane, and if it exists, and if it doesn't, the fact that there needs to be one. So that I think that there's definitely a push and a move towards this conversation around needed infrastructure, and I think that the e-cargo bikes will definitely kind of help move that conversation along.
All right, well, thank you so much. Do you have any closing comments to your class?
No.
Okay, thank you so much.